The courtroom doors swing open, and immediately, something feels off. The young man walking toward the bench doesn't carry himself like most defendants who appear before Judge Frank Caprio in Providence Municipal Court. There's no nervousness in his stride, no humility in his posture. He's wearing expensive sneakers, designer jeans, and a fitted black hoodie with some kind of cryptocurrency logo embroidered on the chest. His hair is styled with that deliberate messiness that somehow costs $100 at a salon. And as he approaches the podium, there's something playing at the corners of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like a smirk. Judge Caprio looks up from the case file, his reading glasses perched on his nose, and there's already a question in his eyes. He's seen thousands of people stand before this bench over his decades on the municipal court, and he's learned to read body language like a second language. This young man's energy is all wrong for someone facing multiple parking violations and a more serious charge of reckless driving in a school zone. "Good morning," Judge Caprio says, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that has made him beloved far beyond the borders of Rhode Island. "State your name for the record, please." "Trevor Ashford," the defendant says, and even those two words carry a tone that makes the courtroom clerk glance up sharply. There's a practiced confidence there, bordering on arrogance. Judge Caprio removes his glasses slowly, folding them with deliberate care before setting them down on the bench. It's a gesture anyone who watches his courtroom regularly would recognize. It means he's shifting from reading mode to full attention mode. "Mr. Ashford, it says here you have 6 unpaid parking tickets spanning the last 4 months, and you were cited for reckless driving on Benefit Street, near the elementary school. Is that correct?" "Yeah, that's correct, Your Honor," Trevor says, and the smirk hasn't left his face. If anything, it's grown slightly. The prosecutor, a young woman named Miss Chen who's been handling traffic cases for the city for 3 years, steps forward with her notes. "Your Honor, the parking violations total $840. But the reckless driving charge is more concerning. According to the officer's report, Mr. Ashford was clocked at 47 miles per hour in a 20-mile-per-hour school zone at 2:30 in the afternoon, while children were being dismissed. When the officer pulled him over, Mr. Ashford allegedly told him, and I'm quoting from the report, 'I didn't see why it mattered since school was basically over.'" A small murmur ripples through the courtroom gallery. There are about 15 people in the audience today, other defendants waiting for their cases, a few law students observing, and one elderly woman in the back who comes to watch Judge Caprio's proceedings almost every week because, as she once told a reporter, "He reminds me there's still goodness in the world." Judge Caprio's expression doesn't change, but there's a slight tightening around his eyes. 47 in a 20 zone. Near children. He lets the words sit in the air for a moment. "Mr. Ashford, do you understand why this is serious?" Trevor shrugs, and it's that shrug that really does it, that casual dismissal of something involving the safety of children. "I mean, I get it, Your Honor. But honestly, I was just in a hurry. I had a business call I couldn't miss. Crypto markets don't wait for anybody, you know? And like I said to the cop, most of the kids were already gone." Judge Caprio leans back in his chair, studying the young man before him. In the decades he's been on this bench, he's developed an almost supernatural ability to see beneath the surface of people's presentations. He's given second chances to recovering addicts, dismissed charges against elderly people who couldn't afford to pay, and shown mercy to single parents drowning in circumstances beyond their control. But he's also held people accountable when they needed to be held accountable. And right now, every instinct he has is telling him there's something deeper happening here, even if he can't quite see it yet. "Crypto markets," Judge Caprio repeats softly, almost to himself. Then, louder, "Miss Chen, can you tell me, was there any indication Mr. Ashford was impaired or distracted during this incident?" The prosecutor checks her notes. The officer noted that Mr. Ashford was on a phone call via Bluetooth when he was pulled over. He reportedly continued the call even after the officer approached his window, and had to be asked twice to end it. Another murmur from the gallery, and this one carries a different tone, disapproval mixed with disbelief. Judge Caprio notices an older man in the second row shaking his head slowly. The judge makes a mental note of the body language in the room because sometimes the community's reaction tells him as much as the evidence itself. So you were on a business call while driving through a school zone at more than twice the speed limit, Judge Caprio says, and now there's an edge to his voice that wasn't there before. And you continued that call even when an officer of the law was trying to speak with you about endangering children. For the first time, Trevor's smirk falters slightly. I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds worse than it was. Help me understand how it was, then, Judge Caprio says, and there it is, his signature phrase, delivered not with anger but with genuine curiosity. Because that's what makes him different from so many other judges. He doesn't just want to process cases. He wants to understand people. Talk to me, Mr. Ashford. What's going on in your life that made you think this behavior was acceptable? Trevor shifts his weight from one foot to the other, the first sign of genuine discomfort. Nothing's going on. I'm busy. I work in cryptocurrency trading and consulting. I've got clients depending on me. Sometimes I've got to move fast and handle multiple things at once. Judge Caprio nods slowly, absorbing this. How old are you, son? 26. 26. The judge writes something down. And these parking tickets, where did you accumulate all of these? Ms. Chen answers before Trevor can. 4 were from parking in handicapped spaces without a permit, Your Honor. 2 were from blocking a fire hydrant. The last one was from parking in a space reserved for expecting mothers outside a medical center. The temperature in the courtroom seems to drop several degrees. Even Trevor seems to recognize that these details aren't helping his case, and his posture stiffens. Judge Caprio looks at him with an expression that's hard to read, not quite anger, not quite disappointment, but something that combines elements of both with a deep, weary sadness. Handicapped spaces, Judge Caprio says quietly. Expecting mothers. He pauses, and in that pause, everyone in the courtroom can feel the weight of his consideration. Mr. Ashford, I'm trying very hard to give you the benefit of the doubt here. I'm trying to see the good person underneath all of this. But you're not making it easy for me. Segment 2: The defendant's background unfolds. Trevor's smirk has completely vanished now, replaced by a kind of defensive blankness. Judge Caprio has seen this look before. It's the expression people wear when they're trying to protect themselves from feeling shame they know they should feel but don't want to acknowledge. The judge has learned over the years that you can't force someone to feel remorse, but sometimes you can lead them to a place where they recognize it themselves. Let me ask you something, Judge Caprio continues, his tone shifting to something softer, more conversational. This is the technique that has made him famous, the way he can disarm people with kindness, make them lower their defenses without even realizing it. You mentioned cryptocurrency trading. That's a relatively new field. How did you get into that line of work? Trevor seems surprised by the question, as if he expected to be yelled at rather than asked about his career. I got into it in college, actually. Started trading Bitcoin when I was 19. Made some good moves, turned a couple thousand into about 40 grand in 6 months. Dropped out of URI's sophomore year to do it full time. University of Rhode Island, Judge Caprio says, nodding. That's a good school. What were you studying? Computer science. And your parents, what did they think about you leaving school to trade cryptocurrency? For the first time, a genuine emotion flickers across Trevor's face. It's fast, but Judge Caprio catches it. Pain. Real pain, there and gone in an instant. My mom wasn't thrilled about it, Trevor says, and his voice has lost some of its earlier confidence. But I proved her wrong. I've made more money in the last 5 years than I would have made in 10 years with a regular computer science job. Judge Caprio leans forward slightly. Your mom. You said wasn't thrilled. Past tense. Is she? She died, Trevor cuts in, and the words come out harder than they need to, defensive. Last year. October. The courtroom goes absolutely silent. Judge Caprio's entire demeanor shifts in an instant, the stern judge replaced by the compassionate father figure that millions have seen in viral videos online. I'm sorry for your loss, son, he says, and the sincerity in his voice is undeniable. What happened, if you don't mind me asking? Trevor's jaw clenches. Cancer. Breast cancer that spread. She fought it for 2 years, but... He trails off, shaking his head. Look, I don't see what this has to do with parking tickets. Bear with me, Judge Caprio says gently. I'm trying to understand. Was your mother still alive when you got these citations? Let me check the dates. He picks up the file, studying it. The first ticket is from August of this year. So this was all after her passing. Yeah. So what? So grief does strange things to people, Judge Caprio says, and there's something in his voice now that makes several people in the gallery lean forward. The judge has lost people he loved. He's buried friends, said goodbye to family members. He knows the landscape of loss. Sometimes when we're hurting, we act out in ways that don't make sense. We take risks we shouldn't take. We stop caring about consequences because nothing feels like it matters anymore. Trevor's face hardens. That's not what this is. I'm not acting out. I'm just busy and I made some mistakes with parking. It's not that deep. Ms. Chen, the prosecutor, shifts uncomfortably. She can sense where Judge Caprio is going with this, and there's a part of her that wants to object, to keep the focus on the violations themselves. But she's worked in this courtroom long enough to know that when Judge Caprio starts digging like this, he usually finds something important. So she stays quiet. Let me ask you something else, Judge Caprio says, pulling out another document from the file. According to the officer's report, you were driving a Tesla Model S. That's an expensive vehicle. You said you've been successful in your trading. Yeah, I do all right. Some of the defensive arrogance is creeping back into Trevor's voice. I work hard. I've earned what I have. I'm sure you have, Judge Caprio says, nodding. And I'm not judging your success. But I notice from your information here that you're still listed at the same address in Cranston that you had on your driver's license from 4 years ago. Is that correct? Trevor hesitates. Yeah, that's right. Is that your parents' house? Another hesitation, longer this time. It was my mom's house. Just her and me. My dad left when I was 8. I don't know where he is. Judge Caprio nods slowly, adding this piece to the puzzle he's building in his mind. So you're living in your mother's house. The house where she raised you. Where she got sick. Where she died, Trevor finishes, and now there's a crack in his voice, small but unmistakable. Yeah. She died in the living room. Hospice set up a hospital bed there because she didn't want to be in a facility. She wanted to be home. The elderly woman in the back of the courtroom has pulled out a tissue. The law students are completely still, sensing they're witnessing something that goes beyond a typical traffic hearing. Judge Caprio removes his glasses again, rubbing the bridge of his nose, a gesture his bailiff recognizes as the judge processing something emotionally heavy. That must have been very difficult, Judge Caprio says softly. Being her caregiver at the end. That's a tremendous responsibility for someone your age. I had hospice nurses, Trevor says, but his voice is quieter now. They came twice a day. But yeah, I was there the rest of the time. I worked from her bedside. Trading, consulting, whatever I could do on my laptop. She didn't want to be alone, so I. He stops, swallowing hard. I made sure she wasn't alone. That's admirable, Judge Caprio says, and he means it. That's real love, son. A lot of people wouldn't have done that. They would have chosen differently. But you stayed with your mother. You put her needs first. Trevor nods, and for the first time since he walked into the courtroom, the defenses are starting to come down. Judge Caprio can see it in the way his shoulders have dropped slightly, the way his hands have unclenched. The smirk from earlier is completely gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. Mr. Ashford, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer, Judge Caprio says, his voice taking on that particular tone he uses when he's about to ask the question that matters. Since your mother passed away, have you talked to anyone about what you've been through? A counselor, a therapist, a grief support group? Trevor shakes his head. No. I don't need that. I'm handling it. Are you? Judge Caprio asks, and the question hangs in the air like a challenge. Because from where I'm sitting, son, I see a young man who's driving recklessly through school zones, parking in handicapped spaces, ignoring the basic rules of community and safety. I see someone who's so wrapped up in phone calls and crypto markets that he can't even slow down for children. And I'm wondering if what I'm really seeing is someone who's running as fast as he can from pain he hasn't processed. Segment 3: Caprio's emotional discovery. The silence that follows Judge Caprio's words is profound. Trevor stands at the podium, and something in his face has shifted. The armor of arrogance and deflection is cracking, revealing glimpses of the person underneath. His breathing has changed, becoming slightly shallower, and his eyes have taken on a glassy quality that suggests tears aren't far away. Judge Caprio doesn't push. He just waits. This is another one of his signature techniques: the compassionate pause, the space he creates for people to fill with truth. In the gallery, people have stopped fidgeting. Even the court reporter has paused her steady typing, sensing that something significant is unfolding. Trevor starts, then stops. He clears his throat. I don't think about it. That's how I handle it. I stay busy. I take calls, I watch the markets, I keep moving. Because if I stop moving, if I'm just sitting in that house with nothing to do, then I start thinking about. His voice cracks, and he has to stop again. About her, Judge Caprio finishes gently. Trevor nods, not trusting his voice for a moment. When he speaks again, the words come faster, like something dammed up is finally breaking free. The house still smells like her. Like her perfume and the lavender soap she used. I haven't changed anything in her bedroom. Her clothes are still in the closet. Her books are still on the nightstand, with her reading glasses on top of them, like she just put them down for a second and she's going to come back and pick up where she left off. Judge Caprio's eyes are soft with understanding. He's nodding slowly, encouraging Trevor to continue without interrupting the flow of what's finally emerging. And the worst part is, I don't even remember the last conversation we had, Trevor continues, and now his voice is definitely shaking. Not like a real conversation. The last week, she was so doped up on pain meds that she barely made sense. She'd talk about her childhood, about people who'd been dead for decades like they were in the next room. And before that, when she was more lucid, I was always on my laptop, always taking calls, always telling her, just a minute, Mom, I need to finish this trade, I need to handle this client. And now she's gone and I can't remember the last time I really looked at her and just talked. Just sat there and talked like we used to. A tear rolls down the elderly woman's cheek in the back row. One of the law students has his hand pressed to his mouth. Judge Caprio's expression is a mixture of sadness and compassion, the look of someone who understands grief not as an abstract concept but as a lived reality. So yeah, Trevor says, and there's a bitter edge to his voice now, directed inward. Maybe I am running. Maybe I'm driving too fast and parking wherever I want and treating everything like it doesn't matter because nothing feels like it matters anymore. She was the only family I had. She worked 2 jobs to keep me in decent schools after my dad left. She never gave up on me even when I was screwing around in high school. And when I dropped out of college, she was disappointed, but she said, Trevor, if this is your path, then walk it with integrity. That's the word she used. Integrity. Judge Caprio writes something down, and when he looks up, there's a question in his eyes that he seems to be carefully formulating. Mr. Ashford, I want to go back to something Ms. Chen mentioned earlier. One of your parking tickets was for parking in a space reserved for expecting mothers outside a medical center. Do you remember that incident? Trevor's face flushes. Yeah. I remember. Can you tell me about it? I was meeting a client nearby for coffee. The parking lot was full, and that space was open, so I took it. I was only going to be there for 20 minutes. What medical center was it? Judge Caprio asks. Trevor hesitates. Women and Infants Hospital. Something passes across Judge Caprio's face, a flash of recognition, of understanding. Anyone from Rhode Island knows Women and Infants Hospital. It's one of the premier hospitals in the state for obstetrics and gynecology. But it's also where Judge Caprio's bailiff had her babies, where the prosecutor's sister received cancer treatment, where countless families have experienced both the best and worst moments of their lives. Women and infants, Judge Caprio repeats softly. Mr. Ashford, wasn't that where your mother received some of her treatment? The question lands like a physical blow. Trevor actually takes a step back from the podium, and his face goes pale. The courtroom is absolutely silent, everyone holding their breath. How did you? Trevor starts, then realizes the judge must have seen medical documentation in the file. He nods slowly. Yeah. That's where her oncologist was. Dr. Silverman. She had appointments there every week for months, and then after the surgery, she had to go back for checkups and then for palliative care consultations. Judge Caprio leans forward, his voice dropping to something just above a whisper. Son, when you parked in that space for expecting mothers, were you visiting that medical center for any reason? Were you there to see your mother's old doctor? To pick up her medical records? To settle a bill? Trevor's composure finally, completely breaks. His face crumples, and tears start flowing freely down his cheeks. I was sitting in my car outside the entrance, he says, the words coming out between choked breaths. I'd driven there without even meaning to. I was supposed to meet a client in Warwick, but I ended up there instead. And I parked in that spot and I sat there for an hour, just looking at the building, thinking about all the times I drove her there for appointments. All the times we sat in the waiting room and she'd tell me not to worry, that everything would be fine. She was always comforting me, even though she was the one who was sick. Even when she was terrified, and I know she was terrified, I could see it in her eyes, she'd put on a brave face for me. The tears are coming faster now, and Trevor doesn't even try to wipe them away. Judge Caprio has pulled out his own handkerchief, a neatly pressed white cloth that his wife makes sure he carries every day, and he hands it across the bench to the young man. Trevor takes it, pressing it to his eyes. I got the parking ticket because I stayed too long, Trevor continues. 2 hours, maybe more. I couldn't make myself leave. And when the parking enforcement officer knocked on my window, I just handed him my license and registration and I didn't even argue. I didn't care. What's an $80 ticket compared to? He can't finish the sentence. Judge Caprio stands up from his chair, something he rarely does in the middle of a hearing, and walks around the bench. It's a dramatic break from protocol, but everyone in the courtroom understands that this has transcended the typical boundaries of a traffic hearing. This has become something else entirely, a moment of pure human connection, of one person reaching across the divide of pain to touch another person's suffering. Come here, son, Judge Caprio says, opening his arms. And Trevor, this young man who walked into the courtroom with a smirk on his face and designer clothes on his back, who presented himself as someone too successful and too busy to care about rules, falls into the embrace of this elderly judge and sobs like a child. Segment for the courtroom climax or twist. The embrace lasts for perhaps 30 seconds, but in the emotional landscape of the courtroom, it feels much longer. Judge Caprio holds Trevor firmly, one hand on his back, the way a father holds a son who's hurting. The gallery is completely silent except for the sound of Trevor's crying and the occasional sniffle from observers who've been moved to tears themselves. The court reporter has tears streaming down her face. The bailiff, a tough former Marine who's seen just about everything in his 20 years of service, has turned away slightly, blinking hard. When Judge Caprio finally steps back, he keeps his hands on Trevor's shoulders, looking him directly in the eyes. Listen to me, he says, his voice firm but gentle. What you're feeling right now, this pain, this grief, this guilt about not having that last perfect conversation, it's all normal. It's all part of loving someone and losing them. But son, the way you've been handling it, driving recklessly, endangering children, treating the world like it's something you can just speed through without consequences. That's not honoring your mother's memory. That's not walking with integrity. Trevor nods, wiping his eyes with the handkerchief. I know. I know that. I just. I don't know how to stop running. Judge Caprio guides him back to the podium, then returns to his seat behind the bench. But something has fundamentally changed in the courtroom's energy. This is no longer judge and defendant. This is something more human, more connected. I want to tell you about my own mother, Judge Caprio says, settling back into his chair. Her name was Philomena. She came to this country from Italy when she was 16 years old. Didn't speak English. Worked in factories. Raised 5 children, and I was the youngest. She died in 1982, and son, I can still remember things I wish I'd said to her. Things I wish I'd asked her. That doesn't go away. But here's what I learned: the best way to honor the people we've lost is to become the kind of person they believed we could be. Trevor is listening intently, his breath still hitching occasionally with the aftermath of tears. Judge Caprio continues. Your mother said to walk your path with integrity. That means when you're driving through a neighborhood where children are present, you slow down. Every time. Without exception. Because one of those children could be someone else's whole world, and their mother is trusting that people like you, people behind the wheel, will value that child's life enough to drive carefully. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, Your Honor, Trevor says, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, there's no arrogance in his voice. Just humility. Just honest acknowledgement. And when you see a handicapped parking space, you leave it for someone who needs it. Because maybe there's a woman out there with MS who's struggling to walk, or a veteran who lost his legs in service, or an elderly man with a walker who just needs to get into the pharmacy to pick up his heart medication. These aren't just rules, Mr. Ashford. These are expressions of community care. These are how we show each other that we matter, that we're all connected. Trevor nods, and more tears stream down his face, but these seem different, not tears of breaking down, but tears of something breaking open. Of realization. Judge Caprio looks down at the case file, then back up at Trevor. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If your mother were here right now, sitting in that gallery watching this hearing, what do you think she would want me to do? Trevor's breath catches. He looks down at his hands, then up at the ceiling, blinking. Finally, he looks back at Judge Caprio. She'd want you to hold me accountable. She'd want me to face what I did. But she'd also. His voice breaks again. She'd also want me to get help. She'd want me to stop running and actually deal with what I'm feeling. That's exactly what I think too, Judge Caprio says softly. Then he turns to the prosecutor. Ms. Chen, I want to hear your recommendation, but before you give it, I want to share some information. I've been looking through the case file, and I see that Mr. Ashford has no prior criminal record. His driving record before these recent incidents was clean. And I see from the notes that when he was pulled over for the reckless driving, he did eventually comply with the officer's instructions, and the breathalyzer test was negative. Is all of that accurate? Ms. Chen nods. Yes, Your Honor. That's all correct. And the officer's report notes that Mr. Ashford seemed emotionally distressed during the stop. That's a direct quote from Officer Patterson's notes. Did you see that? Ms. Chen flips through her papers. Yes, Your Honor. I did see that notation. Judge Caprio steeples his fingers, thinking. The courtroom waits. This is the moment everyone has been building toward, the judgment, the decision that will determine not just the legal outcome but the moral resolution of everything they've witnessed. Here's what concerns me most, Judge Caprio finally says. The reckless driving in a school zone. That's serious, Mr. Ashford. That's not just a mistake. That's a decision that could have ended in tragedy. I want you to imagine something for me. I want you to imagine that you had hit a child that day. I want you to imagine that because of your need to take a business call, because of your hurry, because of your pain that you weren't dealing with, you had struck a 7-year-old girl who was walking home from school. Can you imagine that? Trevor's face goes white. Yes, Your Honor. Now imagine that little girl's mother. Imagine her getting the phone call from the hospital. Imagine her rushing there, terrified. Imagine her standing over her child's hospital bed, not knowing if her daughter is going to be okay. Imagine her looking at you and asking why you were going 47 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. What would you tell that mother? The hypothetical scenario hangs in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Trevor's hands are shaking. I couldn't. There's nothing I could say that would make it okay. That's right, Judge Caprio says. There isn't. And here's what I want you to understand, that mother you're imagining. She's real. She exists. Maybe not as a victim of your driving that day, thank God, but as a real person whose child walks on that street, who trusts that drivers will follow the rules that keep her baby safe. Just like your mother trusted people to treat you with care when you were young. Segment 5: Final Judgment and Moral Message. Judge Caprio takes a long breath, and everyone in the courtroom leans forward imperceptibly. The law students in the gallery have their notebooks open, but none of them are writing. They're just watching, sensing that they're witnessing something that can't be captured in notes, something that exists in the space between law and humanity. Mr. Ashford, I'm going to be honest with you, Judge Caprio begins. When you first walked into this courtroom, I didn't like what I saw. I saw entitlement. I saw carelessness. I saw someone who thought the rules didn't apply to him. And I was preparing to throw the book at you, as they say. Maximum fines, mandatory community service, possible suspension of your license. Trevor nods, accepting this. I understand, Your Honor. But then we talked, Judge Caprio continues. And I saw something different. I saw a young man in tremendous pain. I saw someone who lost the most important person in his world and has been trying to outrun the grief by staying busy, by moving fast, by never stopping long enough to feel what needs to be felt. And I saw someone who, when finally given the space to be honest, was capable of recognizing his mistakes. The judge pauses, consulting his notes one more time. Here's what I'm going to do. On the 6 parking violations, I'm dismissing 4 of them. The 2 I'm keeping are the handicapped parking violations, because those aren't about you, Mr. Ashford. Those are about protecting vulnerable members of our community who need those spaces. For those 2 violations, I'm reducing the fines from $150 each to $50 each. $100 total. A small sound of surprise escapes from someone in the gallery. This is far more lenient than anyone expected. But Judge Caprio isn't finished. However, the reckless driving charge that I cannot dismiss. That would be irresponsible of me and dangerous for the community. The law requires a fine of not less than $500 and not more than $1,000 for reckless driving in a school zone. I'm setting your fine at $500. Trevor nods, his expression serious. Yes, Your Honor. That's fair. But here's the other part, Judge Caprio says, and now his voice takes on that particular tone that signals he's about to do something unexpected. I'm also sentencing you to 100 hours of community service. And I'm going to be very specific about where you're going to complete that service. There's an organization here in Providence called PERI, the Providence Association for Romanian Immigrants. But they don't just serve Romanians anymore, they work with all kinds of immigrant families and low-income families, providing after-school programs and tutoring and mentorship for children. Trevor is listening intently, not sure where this is going. I'm assigning you to volunteer with their youth mentorship program, Judge Caprio continues. You're going to spend 100 hours working with young people who've lost parents, or whose parents are struggling, or who need someone to believe in them the way your mother believed in you. You're going to help them with their homework. You're going to listen to their problems. You're going to show up for them consistently, the way your mother showed up for you. Something shifts in Trevor's face, a spark of something that might be purpose, or hope, or the first glimpse of a path forward. Your Honor, I don't know if I'd be good at that. You'll learn, Judge Caprio says firmly. And here's the other requirement, you're going to attend grief counseling. I'm going to give you the names of 3 excellent counselors here in Providence who specialize in bereavement. You need to complete at least 12 sessions within the next 6 months, and you need to provide proof of attendance to my clerk. Ms. Chen, the prosecutor, is nodding slowly. This is rehabilitation, not just punishment. This is the kind of sentence that might actually change someone's life trajectory. But there's one more thing, Judge Caprio says, and now his voice softens to something almost tender. I want you to write a letter to your mother. I want you to tell her all the things you wished you'd said when she was alive. I want you to thank her for what she gave you, and I want you to apologize for the ways you've dishonored her memory since her death. And I want you to make her a promise about the kind of man you're going to become. Trevor is crying again, but silently this time, tears streaming down his face as he nods. Okay. I can do that. You don't have to show me the letter, Judge Caprio adds gently. That's between you and her. But you write it, and then I want you to take it to her grave, and I want you to read it out loud. Can you do that for me?